It says here, how do you feel when that journey ended prematurely with Justice League's upheaval? I went into such depression when the film was taken away and rewritten, but I didn't even feel entitled to be depressed because Zack and Debbie were dealing with their family tragedy. Measured against that, losing the film that you wrote seems like nothing at all, but it did hurt. It hurts to think that I cared so much about these characters and worked on nothing else for a very long time. Do you feel like the title and the cuts for length made it harder for people to appreciate things that did work in Batman v Superman? That's exactly right. The audience has to know that they're in good hands. The minute that you lose them from a story point of view, they lose the desire to look at it generously. Once the critics decide a movie is incoherent, it's just a pile on. Then they attack everything. There's a line at the beginning of the film where a warlord says to Lois Lane, "They didn't tell me the interview was with a lady." And Lois replies, "I'm not a lady, I'm a journalist." So one reviewer held up this line as proof positive of my stupidity and my inability to write Lois or to write at all, which is that's a very unfair thing to do. I mean, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy. Well, the character of Lois in the movie was inspired by the journalist Mary Colvin, who was, of course, killed in Syria. She was one of the most intrepid journalists who ever lived, in my opinion. And there's a story in Vanity Fair, Mary Colvin's Private War by Marie Brenner, and the line that Lois says is almost exactly the line that was in the article, where a Chechen warlord said he wouldn't shake her hand because she was a woman. Murray Colvin replied, "There is no woman in this room, only a journalist." So that line was my tribute to her. But then in the pile-on, a line like that is held as proof positive that I don't understand either women or journalists or human beings, and that I'm a shitty writer. And that really is some bullshit. That really is some bullshit. I never saw that, that take specifically, but just sitting here now, listening to, reading what he's saying, understanding where he's coming from, that is absolutely a bunch of bullshit. Absolutely. That was the climate in which the film dropped. Anything and everything was attacked because the reviewers questioned the motives behind the film. And to some extent, I don't blame them. The marketing promised this mindless fight movie, and any attempt to make something real or complicated was just met with an anger and vitriol because the audience just didn't assume good intentions. Another complaint was that Snyder's DC films were too grim and heavy. Did you feel blamed for that? The studio seemed to take this position after BVS that my writing was too dark and that this was their problem. But what they didn't mention was that, for example, in the draft of the Batman Superman script that WB had developed, which was the draft I was handed when I joined the project, Batman was not only branding criminals with the Bat brand, he also ended the movie by branding Lex Luthor. That ending was a point over which I explicitly went to the mat with the studio again and again. I argued that Batman cannot end the movie continuing this behavior, which amounted to torture, because then the movie was endorsing what he did. What was your argument to them? It's one thing if Batman Begins the movie as a dark version of himself whom we don't recognize, but he is to see the error of his ways and remember his better self in the course of the movie. By the end of the movie, he needs to be the Batman we know, and he has to be ready to go and create the Justice League. Otherwise, I said, what was the point? What else did you push back against? I'm the one who had been saying that we can't make a joke out of Superman raining hell upon Black African Muslim characters in the desert, as Lois promises that Superman is not going to go easy on them because they punched her. But somehow, I'm the person with the dark sensibility. So Warner Brothers originally they wanted this African warlord's people to punch Lois Lane and for Lois to tell them, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. My Superman, he's not going to go easy on you for that. He's going to burn this place down." Like, that's what they wanted. They wanted that kind of sensibility. The studio wanted that. I wanted to say, I've been saving you from yourselves. I've been working with the director to bring a voice of conscience and sanity to the almost perversively dark film you've been developing for years, but I'm the problem here. And it makes sense. It makes sense what he's saying. Did you feel you were able to significantly change that Africa scene with Superman for the better? I removed the punch, for one thing. Just think about the optics of that. I was able to add material to the film and ask the movie to grapple with what the battle meant, so that it didn't seem like a casual scene of Superman intervening in this way without reckoning with the consequences of intervention. I placed that in context of a moral question. Superman says, think of what could have happened. And Lois says, think of what did. That sequence takes place in a fictional African country called Nairobi. And there's manipulation happening with Lex Luthor and his American mercenaries trying to provoke conflict and frame Superman. After Superman rescues Lois, the film shows the people of that region truly suffering in a crossfire. Without sounding too political, it's not lost on me that much like a drone, Superman sort of comes from out of nowhere, from the sky, and vanquishes his enemies and then flies off with no consequences. That may not have been an angle on Superman that people wanted to see and wanted to think about him. So he's kind of acknowledging the fact of the matter with Superman and how he would be treated or how it would be perceived in him having this committing the same actions that he would in the comics, where he comes, he saves the day, he shakes a hand and he flies off. In the real world, it wouldn't happen that way. In the real world, governments would become involved in that kind of decision making, because obviously you're taking an action against in a realm where there is political tension and political incidents that are taking place that are resulting in violence. We see this all the time on the news. There are countries that are committing vast crimes against their people, and if you had an alien come out of the sky and intervene in those actions in the way he saw fit, well, then who is to question what this guy's motives are at the end of the day? I think that that's a perfectly reasonable and logical way to look at the situation. Did you also add the scene where character Kahina Ziri, who was a witness to the battle, testifying about the aftermath in Washington, D.C., ultimately we learned that she was coerced by Luthor, but her testimony does make the audience and Clark himself reevaluate his actions and how he operates. Yeah, that was added afterwards. I added that scene. He came down and then came fire. The story that she tells, at least in the script, is that he destabilized the entire region and then government forces came in and slaughtered the village. Since these were the optics that already were in the movie, I thought that my job was to ask questions and say, what do we actually mean by this? You're pushing back against some of these scenes and you're saying that the studio wanted these things, but you also had to convince Zack, right? So was Zack Snyder open to these kinds of criticisms? When I would talk to Zack about some of these things, I think he got it. We discovered that we were on the same page and that he loved the idea of a scene in Congress with this African woman describing the consequences in her village. He right away sparked to that and got excited about casting that character with actor Wunmi Mosaku, now known for Lovecraft Country. Very good for her. And thought she could be a very important character for the movie. So Zack was quite open to all this stuff, and I thought the studio was too. Why weren't they? Later, when I realized that so much of the plot was going to be cut, I began to think, well, they didn't really want this kind of story. The last things to get cut out always are the stunt scenes and the special effects scenes because they cost so much. But by the time they're all in, they're in the assembly, enormous amounts of money have been spent on every frame. So when you're looking to cut time, the things that get cut out tend not to be the big effects sequences or the fights or the stunt sequences. They're the things that get cut are the nuance. Yeah, the scenes that actually give meaning to those bigger action sequences. I think that's a problem not only with this film, but I suppose for all tentpole films. Given your concerns about the BVS structure you inherited, why did you sign on to do Justice League? I agreed to write Justice League because I wanted a chance to write these characters with love and hope after getting through the darkness of BVS. The end of my version of BVS includes Bruce seeing the error of his ways and promising to change. It's the return of conscience after an ethical nightmare. And in Justice League, Bruce does do better. There was a mood of fear at the studio, no doubt. That's a quote coming from Chris Terrio. After Batman v Superman came out, the critical reaction was negative and the box office was underwhelming. Justice League was about to begin shooting. What was the atmosphere like then? There was a mood of fear in the studio, no doubt. My impression was that the people in boardrooms started making the decisions, and they were decisions based on arbitrary metrics that had nothing to do with the stories that were being told. What gave you that sense? Right before the time of Batman Superman, I was asked to attend an event in New York where the cast and filmmakers were paraded in front of a room of investors at the Time Warner Center, I guess to convince them that their money was in good hands. What happened there? These guys were in charge because they controlled the money at the very top of the pyramid. They were making big decisions, not the film executives we're talking about, but Wall Street guys. One guy who I can only describe as the man who central casting sends you when you're trying to cast douchebag number one, pulled me aside and started telling me how to write Batman. I'm not naive. I know that if you don't want to have any back and forth with the money people, you should just write poetry because you don't need hundreds of millions of dollars. But something about the distribution of power at that time just seemed off to me. It was removing even the pretense that Capital wasn't calling the shots. What impact did the studio tensions have on your writing? I rewrote Justice League to lighten the mood a little bit, which became the Zack Snyder Justice League. That's a slightly lighter, less dense version of the script, which I was fine with. I'm sane, and I will play ball with those kinds of notes. So Zack Snyder shot your version of the script. What happened after his family crisis led him to leave the project, and Warner Brothers brought Joss Whedon to rewrite and reshoot. When the movie was taken away, that felt like it was some directive that had come from people who are neither filmmakers nor film friendly. The directive to make the movie under 2 hours, regardless of what the movie needed to do, and to make the colors brighter and to have funny sitcom jokes in it. Zack told me it was then Warner Brothers chairman Kevin Tsujihara's mandate that it be under 2 hours and more comedic. Yeah, that's what I heard also. I never had anything direct with him. Tsujihara, as far as I can tell, and the brass at the very top decided the order of the films. I was not consulted on the order of the films, or even though I was the person writing Justice League. They just determined that it was going to be Batman, Superman, and then Wonder Woman, then Justice League, then Aquaman. So there was never any thought to how the world was constructed before they issued this edict. They said, conform to this schedule. Explain how that complicated things. The Wonder Woman script wasn't even finished when I wrote Justice League. So I had no basis to write Wonder Woman other than Batman, Superman. The mascara didn't even exist. I was never shown anything on the page for it. I didn't know whether people could talk underwater. That was a thing that I had to ask because I didn't know if I could do underwater scenes with Aquaman and Atlanteans. It was all just from scratch because there had been no solo character films. So Justice League needed to establish 3 of the characters. It had to create a long game mythology for the DC universe. It had to resurrect Superman because he was dead at the end of the last movie. I just don't know how you could do all of those in under 2 hours. Maybe the 2017 release proved that you couldn't. Studio co-presidents John Berg and Jeff Johns were on the Justice League set every day, which was a mandate from Tsujihara to babysit Snyder, as he put it. What was your relationship with them? Look, I admire Jeff as a writer of DC Comics. He's been nice to me, and it's a perfectly cordial relationship. As an executive, you get into very thorny territory when you have a person who's a writer who's also making executive decisions and sitting in the chair where on other films the writer would have been. So I think it's miraculous that Zack shot as much of the script as he did, because I know that there was constant pressure to simplify, to change, to do whatever it is the studio wanted, because there were rumblings that they didn't want this version. Oh, that's a dope picture. Oh, that's dope. That looks good. Ooh, right. Did you have many interactions with the actors? I wasn't invited to the set, but obviously I know Ben, and I got to know Ray Fisher. We developed Cyborg together. Ray came to my apartment in East Village, and he and I just would take long walks and talk about Cyborg and the responsibility of putting the first black DC superhero in a movie on screen. That was a big responsibility that we both understood and took very seriously. Remember, this was before Black Panther. There obviously have been some black superheroes over the years, but none depicted with such a budget and such scale and in such a mainstream way. Cyborg is the one character who can't disguise himself. He lives in his skin. His otherness is a constant fact of his life. And that, to me, and Ray, and I discussed this, speaks about being a black man in America. Cyborg is the one character who can't disguise himself. He lives in his skin. His otherness is a constant fact of his life. And that, to me, and Ray, and I discussed this, speaks about being a black man in America. You cannot remove the otherness that people force upon you. And therefore, Cyborg, when he becomes the hero that he always should have been and was meant to be, that felt like something really strong that we wanted the world to see. And I 100% agree with that. I understand it. And, I agree with it because this was a huge responsibility for Ray Fisher and for Chris Terrio to get it right, and what was the desire of the studio when it came to this character in particular, to make him the quintessential black trope of a given some kind of phrase that he would say, and that would be his thing. Booyah, booyah. I don't give a fuck about him saying that in a cartoon. He never said it in the comics. Never. And he never said it in before the Teen Titans cartoon. There was never a word of it. So why is the cartoon dictating what should happen in a live action movie? Ridiculous and straight bullshit. What about any of the other performers? Did you consult with any of them? I talked to Jeremy Irons on the phone. I had a correspondence with Gal Gadot where she would write to me and say, this doesn't seem quite right for the character. What do you think? And it was all a really good relationship where all the roles would be bespoke to the actors. When the Snyders left the project, that was effectively the end of your involvement. Is that right? That's right. I would only hear occasional reports about the reshoot. I didn't realize how much of the film was going to be changed or vandalized, in my opinion. It became clear as I spoke to various actors that it was a wholesale dismantling of what had been there before. I did not hear from anyone who said it was a pleasant experience. That's key. Were you hearing anything about Joss Whedon and his management of the set? I probably shouldn't get into that. I've never met Joss. I don't know him. I did reach out to him at the beginning of the process through the executives, but I didn't hear back, which is not unusual. When did you watch his version of Justice League? I was in LA at the time working on Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. I was on the west side of Los Angeles working with J.J. Abrams at the time, and I drove to the studio and I sat down and watched it a couple of weeks before release. I immediately called my lawyer and said, I want to take my name off the film. The lawyer then called Warner Brothers and told them that I wanted to do that. Oh, why didn't you? Prints had already been struck on hard drives, burned, or however they deliver movies these days. The elements were on their way, and to remove my name, they would have had to restrike the prints or redo the digital copies, and the film could be delayed. It would have been an international scandal and news story. So I shut up and I said nothing publicly. I've never said anything about Justice League since then, but the movie doesn't represent my work. What happened after that? As far as I know, I wasn't invited to the premiere, and I never watched the film again. So why not follow through and remove your name? I think it would have created a whole wave of negative publicity that I think would have made the situation even worse for the actors and for all the craftspeople who had worked on it, for all kinds of people. But I'm awful happy that Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League is the one that is higher on my IMDb page. Something that was the big and prominent, something that was this big and prominent and then so widely derided, it kind of poisons your reputation, doesn't it? Yeah, it hurts your reputation, but more importantly, it poisons your soul and your confidence, especially when this other version of the film wasn't seen. And now that it has been, and now that it has been seen, People do have problems with this version of the film, and they'll quibble with the length, and they'll quibble with the way that certain characters are written. But that I can take, because that is actual critique of my work. That's a fair game, and that I'll engage with any day. People can quarrel with the movie, but at least they're quarreling with my version and with Zack's version of the film. Did you ever feel like they deliberately made you the scapegoat, the studio? I'm a deeply paranoid person, so I'm always assuming that everyone has it in for me. Justice League, the Zack Snyder version, is the only script other than Argo that I have a sole writer credit on. I really did develop this, so I can stand by this version, love it or hate it. What are you working on right now? What's on the horizon? I won't talk about it quite yet, but it's a small film that I'm doing with Amazon. I'm getting back to smaller character-driven worlds where I don't have any of the franchise issues that have been difficult to grapple with in the past. That's really helped me to reground myself and to remind myself of why I like to write a film. Okay. Well, that is the entire Vanity Fair article, interview with Chris Terrio. I think there's just so many great pieces of information in here that just validate what so many of us had already believed about this situation with WB. This has really been quite the most mismanaged, mishandled franchise of characters and films that I can ever remember seeing in my life, to be honest. I really have never seen such mismanagement. This was an utter dumpster fire from top to bottom, and I think it's quite clear that the executives at WB just did not have an idea of what they were trying to do. They had no idea what they were doing. They were simply looking for something to cash in on, and they knew they had characters like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Justice League, which are far greater, far more influential characters than what you see in the MCU, and they wanted to get as quick a dollar out of that as they could. There was no thought to actually having a coherent universe built and made. And what do we see right now? We see them continuing to do things that make absolutely no sense. The slate of movies as we know it now for DC Films is just random movies that have nothing to do with each other and really aren't even of characters that many of us even give that much of a damn about, that we want to see a silver screen movie. Blue Beetle, who wants to see that? Booster Gold, who wants to see that? I mean, they're great characters together in the comics, but that shouldn't be at the forefront of the movie slate or the potential movie slate for DC. You know, they've announced Lobo. They've announced, we've got the next Suicide Squad movie coming. We've got Black Adam, which is probably one of the few that I definitely want to see. That's in the distance. So a number of movies that are coming out, but most of those movies are completely off of the DC's like B-list characters. We don't really have, you have Flash coming, but the Flash movie has been in production for years, back and forth, showing still that they don't know what they want to do. So you have all of these different elements at WB that are putting a completely incoherent schedule of movies together, and they're still not paying attention to their marquee characters outside of the Batman with the Robert Pattinson, which is not going to be part of the actual continuity, but maybe it is. We don't know. They keep going back and forth on that. So I think this was an excellent article, excellent interview of Chris Terrio to get his very blunt and very frank response to everything that's gone on over the past 5 years with the Justice League drama and the Justice League saga. And I think that he really has kind of put a bow tie on what we all knew the truth to be about this movie studio, that they just don't know what the hell they want to do, and they've got too many egos at top that aren't willing to set their egos aside for the greater good of the studio. Let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments down below. Make sure you hit the like button if you like this video and subscribe to the Ath Geek Uche Nwaneri. Appreciate you guys again for checking out another video here on my channel. You guys are really doing a great job. I appreciate it. I see the arrow starting to point up for this channel, but I appreciate you guys very much, and I will catch all of you on the next one. Peace.